I'm on call this weekend, so I'm not going anywhere. So we're gonna make a video today. This camera is already struggling to focus on me. All right, so today we're gonna talk about the Eos Rp. I've stayed away from making a video about it because the moment I heard about it, I knew immediately that I was not gonna be interested in this camera. And so I've actually kind of held off on watching reviews because I wanted to generate my own opinion. But you know, it's impossible to avoid some of the press that have come out about its lack of certain features. We're going to try and avoid retreading that same ground, but it's inevitable. We'll still probably cover it. So what I've done is I have pulled up the specs and features list of the Canon EOS Rp, and I'm going to look at them as we record, and I'm going to share my thoughts. First of all, I don't know why nobody else is saying this, but I think the EOS Rp is called the Rp because P stands for photography. I'm fairly certain that this camera is aimed at photographers and less videographers. Okay, that's not to excuse its lack of features or disappointing omissions, but I think Canon is very much aiming this camera towards photographers. They are offering this as a cheap entry into full frame photography. Now that said, no camera these days should be without video features. So the fact that they've, left out some stuff there is still inexcusable, if you ask me. All right, so we're gonna dive into some of the features list here. Okay, so looking at the features list, I don't see anything in there that would suggest that this wouldn't be anything but a very capable photo camera. I mean, it's got the dual pixel autofocus. Its focusing capabilities are probably be very strong, and that's not a new technology from Canon. It's a fairly mature focusing system that they're employing here. So there's no reason to believe that it's going to be anything but spectacular for photography. It's full frame, so you can get nice shallow depth of field with fast lenses. The megapixel count is very sufficient. I think it's 26 megapixels. Yeah, it's 26 megapixels, and I think that's very sufficient. My Alpha 65 here is a 24 megapixel camera, and I never find that I need to crop in so much that that matters. In fact, it seems like even my computer, which has an HD screen, sometimes kind of struggles to show all those pixels. So yeah, I think it's going to be a perfectly fine photo camera. But I think that therein lies the problem. I think we're at a stage now where the technology is so advanced that any camera company can fart out a camera these days and it would be excellent for photos. So yeah, if you see yourself as primarily a photographer, or if you need a camera just for photography, there is nothing to gripe about here. It even has that flip out LCD screen so you can do selfies. So I guess when it comes down to it, it's the video features that have everybody crying foul. I can see where they're getting at. So for anybody who's been living under a rock for the last few weeks, I'll briefly summarize why everybody is upset about the Canon EOS Rp. The reason is that this camera does not shoot HD video, so 1080p HD video at 24 frames a second. And why that is a big deal is because a lot of YouTubers and all cinema films are shot at 24 frames per second. So it is a very important, useful frame rate, and it seems weird to leave that out. Just to put things in context, neither does the iPhone. The iPhone does not shoot HD in 30 frames a second. What this camera is capable of shooting is 4K at 24 frames a second. Okay, so that's okay. I think people are still unhappy about the crop factor that gets applied, so you're not shooting with the full frame. Okay, it's really cropped in when you're shooting 4K, but at least you still have 24 frames a second. You know, you might have to go with wider lenses or a step further back. That's something that you could work around, but 24 frames a second is available for 4K. And then when it comes to 1080p, which is actually the resolution that most people are still shooting in, probably not the big time YouTubers, but all the various smaller channels are still shooting in full HD or 1080p. And certainly most computer monitors these days are still full HD 1080p. So that's a very important resolution. However, they only allow for video at 60 frames a second and 30 frames a second. And then when it comes to 720p, holy shit, I am so out of focus. It's again only capable of 60 frames a second and 30 frames a second. It does not appear to be capable of 120 frames a second at all. So no super slow-mo. So I can understand that this is very upsetting for a lot of people. So many people shooting 24 frames a second. I'm pretty sure, you know, MKBHD shoots in 24 frames a second. I know Potato Jet shoots at 24 frames per second. I know that Peter McKinnon, Matty Hapuya all shoot at 24 frames a second. Gerald Undone shoots at 24 frames a second. Most YouTubers shoot at 24 frames a second. And it gives them a bit more of that sort of film cinema type of look. Whereas if you watch videos that shoot in 60 frames a second, it looks a lot more like home video. I think maybe Linus Tech Tips shoots in 60 frames a second. Far fewer number of people out there shooting 30 frames a second. I think Everyday Dad shoots in 30 frames a second. Personally, I shoot at 60 frames a second, but I conform to a 30 frame per second timeline. I can see how this camera is basically useless to all the major YouTubers, and as a result, all the major YouTubers are griping about it, and so all you see is nothing but bad press about this camera. And you know, I'm behind them, even though I don't shoot 24 frames a second. I have my own reasons for not doing it, but I'm with them. Like I can't understand why Canon wouldn't just put in 24 frames per second. It is highly doubtful to me that that camera is not capable of shooting a lower frame rate. How is that possible? If it's able to shoot 1080p at 60 frames a second, it means that it's able to handle that much data and that many frames. All it has to do is work a little less hard to get you to 24 frames per second. So it's very stupid. It's a stupid admission. And I don't think it's accidental. I think it's absolutely intentional. You know, these camera companies, Canon and Sony, have long had this history of omitting certain features in their cameras in order to protect their other products. Especially Sony and Canon, both of which have cinema line products to protect. So they don't want you to have a cheapo, full frame EOS Rp that is capable of doing what the EOS R is doing. They want you to need to own both cameras if you want to shoot photos and video, or at least they want you to cough up more money for the EOS R. So I think it's entirely strategic to try and get you to buy more of their products and to just give them more money. The only other scenario that I can imagine why Canon would pull a stunt like this is precisely to drum up a ton of press coverage for this EOS Rp and then simply fix it with a firmware update to allow 24 frames a second. So it's like free advertising, and then in the end, oh, here it is. Here's what you want. Everybody's happy and elated and suddenly feels good about handing Canon money. That's the only other strategy that I can think of. So yeah, anyway, I said I wouldn't retread the same ground, but I guess I kind of have. The two main points here are, one, I think RP stands for R, photography. This is meant to be a photography camera, not a video camera. I know we want our cameras to do everything. We want We want the perfect camera, and these camera companies could easily give it to us, but they won't, even though all of this is software. In order to give us that perfect camera, perfect, affordable, full-frame camera, they just need to do a software tweak, but they won't do it. It costs them no money, but they want you to buy more, and they want you to spend more money, so they're not going to do it. But anyway, the Eos Rp is going to be a photography camera, and videographers are unlikely to want to use this for video. They'll have to buy something else, or Canon's going to release a firmware update to give you 24 frames per second recording, and then everybody's going to be happy to give them money. So that's it. And then those are my 2 cents about the Canon EOS Rp.